for the.
All right, everybody, I'm going to turn this over to Lee. So I'm going to mute my
2 minutes. I just want to say, all of you kind of know who I am, so that I don't need an introduction. It just by way of introduction for Cantor Jonathan. He was recommended to me by someone in my network, and he is, for the record, he comes very highly recommended actually. And when we interviewed him, we put him through a number of hoops. We had a committee of people who are either musical or think they're musical or are knowledgeable about our services. And so we kind of mashed all those people together and they interviewed him. We interviewed him multiple times. And the thing that really impressed me the most is Jonathan didn't want to talk about himself. He wanted to know, Harvey, I think you got some feedback there. Harvey, put on your mic. Okay. He didn't want to talk. It wasn't all about him. You know, a lot of cantors have massive egos, and he wanted to know about us. And in fact, that's how this whole series idea got started, was he wanted to meet the congregation. And I think, you know, for the past 6 years, we've had people come in who didn't know us, and I think he really wants to hear what our concerns are. And so, Jonathan, with that, I'm going to just turn it over to you, and you can tell us whatever you want about your background, and then you can answer the question, what makes a good Hazzan?
Okay, thank you, Lee. Good evening, everybody. I'm Cantor Jonathan Kohan. First of all, I apologize for my English. I'm from Argentina. Here we speak Spanish. I will do my best. In case I say something you don't really get to understand, please let me know. Well, some quick facts about me. I am from Buenos Aires. I'm a cantor. I'm also a rabbinical student. I was ordained as cantor and studying the Buenos Aires Conservative Seminary, Rabbinic Seminary. It's probably the most important rabbinical seminary of Spanish language. It has students from all around Latin America, even some from Israel, Europe, even some Spanish speakers, American students also. I ran the Cantoria School there in the rabbinical seminary. And well, just like Lee mentioned, I'm very excited to share with you this coming high holidays. I'm a deeply passionate fan and admirer of classic cantorial art, Hazzanut. And I also, I'm very excited about sharing with you this class, this Zoom session, because one of the topics that I find most interesting, both as a student and also as a teacher, because I teach this to my cantorial students, is a question that will maybe sounds easy, but it's quite complex, about what makes a good cantor, what makes a good Hazzan. Because Hazzanim, we are more or less like in the middle point between a spiritual leader and an artist. We do some music, hopefully good music, but we also are religious ministers. We are clergy, so to say. And in my personal case, being both a cantor and Be'ezer Hashem, with God's will, a future rabbi, it's a personal question I keep asking myself over and over. Where is the right middle way between religion and music? What is more important? So in this session, we will go through some classical sources and some more modern sources that go around this question, and we will find that matters and questions and problems we think are contemporary about cantors, about Hazzanut itself. They were born in, I don't know, probably 2,000 years ago, when the rabbinic culture, when the synagogue was born. This session will be focused more in what we could call halacha, or Jewish law, and the session we will have in a couple of weeks will be more focused on what we will call agadah, or more theology, or more philosophy. So to start, and you can just do it through microphone or just in the chat, I will start with a very quick question. That will be, if you have to summary or just synthesize what is a good cantor in one word, which attribute, which feature would you choose? If you have to choose one, which one would you choose? So once again, you can open your microphones or just use the chat, whatever you find more suitable.
I would start out by saying feeling. You want to
Feeling.
be inspired.
Okay.
His feeling would translate to you.
Yes,
I
think
follow
that's
up
quite
on that a little. I would say
a Hasidic
connectivity.
answer.
Sorry,
yes?
connectivity, being able to connect with your congregation.
Yes, I always say that the cantor makes a spiritual shidduch between the congregation and God. He's like, the matchmaker. Yes. What else? Would you be able to, let's say, admit a spiritual, committed cantor that doesn't have a good voice?
I think it would be distracting.
Would be trouble also, because we also know that when we have maybe a cantor is a very good person and it's very spiritual, but we had to listen to him a couple hours or 3 or 4 hours, and we don't and we find displeasing his voice, it's also quite of a problem. And that usually it's very hard, almost impossible, to find a cantor that has all those attributes. And in real life, board members, rabbis, congregations have to, one way or another, to pick which feature, which attribute they will choose. So the idea of today's session, our Rachel here says intention to Kavanah. We'll go through Kavanah in our session too. It's a very, very important aspect. The idea is go through classic sources from Mishnah, which is one of the probably the oldest rabbinical source, to Talmud, to Halacha, and then finish with some modern views. Even this is a serious matter. I think humor, it's a very important aspect of any kind of educational activity. So we can allow ourselves, always with respect and not in an offensive way, but we can allow ourselves to be a bit humorous about this. And you will probably associate some of the things we'll read with probably situations we went through, both as congregants or as board members. So I will share screen. So we start with our session. In case you eventually want to have a copy of this source sheet, this sheet of sources, you can have it. I can mail them without any trouble. So I will just. Oh, I think I need to be made host to share screen.
Carrie, can you make him the host? Earth to Carrie.
I did it. I just made it multiple participants can share.
Oh, okay, great. That's much easier. Okay.
I just wanted to do it before responding.
Okay. Do you all of you can look at the screen? You can see the source. Okay. Well, so the title of this session is What Makes a Good Hazzan? Classic and Modern Jewish Thoughts About the Art of the Cantor. Let's start right away with, like I said, the earliest and probably most important rabbinic source for Jewish matters, which is the Mishnah. This compilation of Jewish practice by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi around the 3rd century of this common era, after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And you know, there are several tractates in the Mishnah, and one of them is called Ta'anit. Ta'anit is the fast, deals with an old practice that we don't have today, that when the people were going through some kind of famine or, I don't know, any kind of plague or something, they just made, let's say, ad hoc fast, public fast. They found fast a very strong way of prayer. And in those cases, they had to choose which member of the congregation would be the one that would do the tefillah. In rabbinical language, tefillah is the amidah, the prayer. So they are debating which one should be called. And I would just go right away in English to just for matter of time, but of course, I felt compelled to also include the original Hebrew source. They said that when they stand up to pray, they place before the ark an elder and ragil. I didn't translate because ragil is a Hebrew word and it has several meanings, but here we translate that one who is conversant with the prayers. Ragil is something like regular, one is that is accustomed to pray. This is interesting, who has children and whose house is empty, so that his heart should be full during the prayer. We have 4 traits mentioned here. Elder is not necessarily what we would call nowadays an elder. Elder is someone who is not a young man. It could now elder we could be translated as a middle age, not really elder in terms of what we nowadays use as elder. So it's someone who is experienced, so to say, who is conversant with the prayers, who is used to pray. It's someone who prays, let's say, every day and stuff. And here comes to a very interesting aspect. One is one who has children. One who has children, and the other is whose house is empty. Why must his house be empty? And the answer lies in the same Mishnah, so that his heart should be full in the prayer. Most commentarists say that empty means empty of money, of food, who is in poverty. What is the reasoning here? If we are in a public fast service because we need food, we need rain, we need health, the one who stands there must feel the need. We couldn't designate someone from this prayer that has all his needs covered. So here we find something interesting once again. If you go through these 4 items, only one of them could be called technical, which is conversant with the prayers, ragil. The other 3 are more, let's say, personal or personal features: age, his family situation, and his financial situation. Like 75% of the traits are not technical traits. Here, we don't find any mention to voice, for example, to any kind of liturgical knowledge, just personal traits. This is the first source that we find here. But you know that after the final redaction of the Mishnah, the rabbis started to study and to comment it and to teach it. And a couple centuries later, they redacted what we now call the Gemara, or the commentary of the Mishnah, and Mishnah and Gemara became the Talmud. And in the Talmud of this same Mishnah, in the Talmud Babli, Talmud from Babylon, we find this Mishnah, but we also find another view. I won't get very technical here, but I will say there were some Mishnayot that didn't enter the final redaction of the Mishnah. Nowadays, we call them Braitot. Braita means like external. And we find another version of this, which is much more detailed. And now we will start getting in a full list of 11 traits that we need for someone who will take the role of Shaliach Tzibur. And I think now the thing becomes much more interesting because it's not just personal features. Now this Braita, now this another version of the Mishnah will deal with aspects that we will find much more akin, much more close to our current idea of a cantor. They say, our rabbi have taught when they stand up to pray, even though there is among them an elder and a scholar, they only allow a ragil to descend before the ark. First idea, if I have to choose between someone who is elder and someone who isn't elder but is a ragil, is someone who is used to pray, I need to choose the one who is ragil. That's what the rabbi said. But we have another view from another rabbi, it's Rabbi Yehuda, that he will offer a much more comprehensive list of what we will call today a cantor have. They send up one who is burdened with children and no way to feed them, who has painstaking labor in the field and whose house is empty. Pirko nae. We won't translate this right now. We'll just later we'll see what's Pirko nae. Who is humble and acceptable to the people, who knows how to chant and has a pleasant voice, who is well versed in Torah, prophets, and writings, and to teach midrash, halachot, and agadot, and well versed in all of the blessings. And now we will read two explanations of two complex terms. Rab Hista. Rab Hista is a rab from the time of the Gemara. He's commenting the Mishnah, said, his house is empty, means empty of sin. He says it's not about poverty, it's about being empty of sin. And Abaye, which is another rabbi from the Gemara time, he said, Pirkonae means that he did not have a bad reputation in his youth. So now the original 4 items list for a Shaliach Tzibur became expanded to 11 items. They just rephrase them. Rabbi said just a ragil, but Rabbi Yehuda says burdened with children and no way to feed them. He must be poor. He's not saying he can be poor. He must be poor. We can have, let's say, a millionaire cantor. That's quite disrupting, but he says that painstaking labor in the field. He must work, and not as a cantor. He must have another job. He must feel the pain of working. We could say probably he must be one of the people. He must know what earning your bread every day means. Whose house is empty, and Rabbi Hisa say empty of sin. He must have a good reputation. Pirkonae, he did not have a bad reputation in his youth. The 3rd and the 4 items, if we combine it, said it's not only he must have a good reputation now, but he also must have a good reputation in his youth. Humble, acceptable to the people. This is a very important topic, and probably is one of the main difference between the idea of the Shaliach Tzibur in the rabbinic times and the Kohen in the biblical times. It's not an imposed role to the people. People, the congregation, must like him, must accept him. What we will call today consensus or just legitimacy. Who knows how to chant. Nowadays, we will say who knows nusach, who knows the melodies. Has a pleasant voice. Here for the first time, we find the idea that voice matters. He must have a pleasant voice. Well-versed in Torah, prophets, and writings, Torah, Nevim, Uchtuvim, he must know about what we will call today Torah shebichtav, but also to teach midrash, halachot, and agadot, what we could call today Torah shebe'al peh, or rabbinic literature, Sifrut Chazal. And he must be well-versed in all of the blessings. As you can see here, we find a much more detailed list of the attributes of Shaliach Tzibur. And once again, we can find personal attributes. Must have children and know way to feed them. He must work. He must be empty of sin. But we also find technical features, so to say. Must know how to chant, a pleasant voice, knows about the Bible and the rabbinic literature. So here we find for the first time, and this is probably the most important Talmudic source about our topic, a comprehensive list of what we could call today the ideal cantor. So I will just make a stop in the share screen. So now what I will ask you is, so far, which of the features that we just read in the list, or 2 or 3 features, you find most important? Because here we don't have like a ranking. Even some of them are named first and some of them are mentioned afterwards. We don't have really like a ranking. So according to your own vision, which of them do you think would be most important in time of choosing a cantor?
Jonathan, for those of us with a short-term memory, will you put the list back up on the screen?
Oh, yes, sure. Sorry. Burden with children, know where to feed them.
Yeah, okay, just so we can read it real quickly.
Okay.
Well, I've met Cantor Mizrahi, and I'd say humble is the least one.
Okay.
Actually, that means if some of the words here, you will find that are literally inserted in the most important prayer about this in the whole High Holy Service, which is the Hineni. If you read and analyze the Hineni, you will see the idea of being humble and have a pleasant voice. And Pirkonae, it's actually literally the word there. So these are concepts that are important. Okay, so which of the attributes you think like it's probably most important, or the one you will just put like you wouldn't compromise it when picking a cantor?
Pleasant voice.
Pleasant voice. Okay, that's
if you don't have that, any of us could do it.
Yes, that's very important. Of course, having and it's interesting that here I will work a bit up. The idea is we don't find the idea of a strong voice or a tremendous voice, pleasant voice. The idea of pleasant is a voice can be a huge voice or maybe a small voice, but you like what you hear. Okay.
I would say well versed in all the blessings, because if you don't know the blessings, the rest is sort of irrelevant. Yes,
that's true. Also, that's true. If you really don't know what's the structure of the liturgy, it's a bit complicated. Of course. Yes.
Cantor,
yes.
I would say, going back to your example of Hineni, where the cantor is going before God and asking for permission to pray for the people.
Exactly.
I think for him to be able to represent the people, it's important that he's acceptable to the people. If he's not acceptable to the people, he really doesn't know the people, and how could he represent them to the heavenly
exactly.
Court? So I think that's pretty important.
Exactly. This is very interesting because remember, we are talking about a text that was redacted around 1500 years ago. And it's talking about, once again, what we could call legitimacy or even democracy. People maybe won't vote for the cantor, but you can pick a cantor if you know that congregation won't like him. Of course, always can happen that you think a congregation will like him and congregation doesn't, but the idea that you should have some kind of consensus or just legitimacy to your choice, because it's a representative. Actually, I think the Hineni is a very moving prayer, because basically what the cantor is saying, it's something like, if God is perfect and infinite and sublime, I could never be enough. I recognize I'm not perfect. I would never achieve the kind of voice, the kind of personality, the kind of knowledge to just be really worth of being an emissary. It's like a very humble prayer about, I am here, I need to stand before you in representation of the congregation, but I acknowledge of my limitations. I'm just being picked by the congregation. And please, whatever mistake I do, don't blame on them, don't take on them, because it's just, I'm not perfect. Okay, so now what we'll go through is one very interesting passage in the Shulchan Aruch. You know, the Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which became the most popular book of Halakha, of Jewish law, based on several previous books. And that, of course, you can trace back the ideas to the Talmud. And he synthesizes what we just learned in a more abridged version of 7 attributes, but the idea is the same. He says, just for reference, Shulchan Aruch, we are talking about around 16th century in Israel. We have an Ashkenazic version of Shulchan Aruch, of course, but we focus on this. The leader, the Shaliach Tzibur, must be one who is fit. But who is fit? Well, what does it mean to be fit for the charge? Thank God it's not physically fit, because else more than one will be just in trouble. One who is free of sin, who has never had a poor reputation, even in his youth, who is humble, who is acceptable to the nation, who is skilled at chanting, whose voice is pleasant, who is accustomed to reading Torah, prophets, and writings. As you can see, he just took this short, these 11 items list and just compressed them to make a 7th list. But if you see, you can clearly find 2 sets of traits, personal traits and skills. The first 4 are basically personal traits, free of sin. He is, we can say it in French, a mensch. The second one, never had a poor reputation. The idea of reputation isn't just a creation of modern marketing and publicity. It comes from from the Talmud. It's important to have a good name, to have a good reputation. Humble, acceptable to the nation. Once again, consensus. And then we go through 3 basic skills. Skill at chanting, which we could call today Nusach HaTfilah. He must know the melodies. Pleasant voice, music skills, and accustomed to reading Torah, prophets, and writings. What nowadays we call Ta'amei HaMikra, the way of chanting the Bible. It's interesting because these 3 skills are essentially the structure of almost every cantorial institute. Music, Nusach HaTfilah, and Ta'amei HaMikra. So what he's putting here is a very compact list of what we could call an ideal cantor. But take a look at something. He first mentions the personal traits, and then after mentions the skills. I think this is no casual. I think that what he's saying here is that first come the personal traits. The other ones, I would say, and I'd say it not only as a cantor, but as a cantorial teacher, the last 3 are much easier to gain than the first 4. If you had the first 4, if you really are a good person, you have a good reputation, you're humble, especially humble, and you have congregation likes you, with some effort, some time, some energy, you can develop some cantorial skills. But if you are not really a good person and you have a very bad reputation and you're not humble, and really you don't have this kind of connection with the people, well, it's very difficult. Just for reference, let's remember that there have been great, very famous cantors, but not necessarily a famous cantor was a successful cantor in the shul. Two different things, because you can have an amazing voice and sell millions of records, but not necessarily have a cantorian career. There's two different things, and the opposite too. You can be an amazing cantor and for different reasons never become famous or something. So if you ask me, probably the model for this, I'm probably like spoiling some idea, but for me, the model was Jocelyn Rosenblatt, which I think has probably the most comprehensive list here. He had it because also in his life, he had to make very difficult choices and to reject very, very large sums of money because actually he didn't want to compromise his ideals. So I think he's one of the models. Okay, but not right now, we go back here. We have this 7 traits list and personal traits and skills. So now my question would be, which personal trait and skill would you choose? If you had to choose one of each list, which combination you would choose? Let me give you a practical example. In many congregations, for example, the cantor doesn't read the Torah. You have another or more than one reader. So probably your skill to read the Torah won't be much of an important skill, for example. While in some other congregations, you have one cantor whose role is precisely to read the Torah. So my question is, which trait of these two lists would you choose?
Well, I will speak as a president and go for the things that will cause me the least grief. And so that would be number 4, acceptable to the nation, and a pleasant voice. And the reason I would pick pleasant voice is because I would say a lot of the congregation, or I'll just speak for myself, wouldn't know if the news act was perfect or not. But I will know if the voice is annoying. And the same thing, I won't know how knowledgeable you are. As long as you're smarter than me, that works. But again, I go back to the voice. If it's, if the voice is grating, then it doesn't hold together.
Interesting. Yes. There's a huge debate nowadays about the role of what we could call Nusach HaTfilah. But yes, actually nowadays, especially after this huge, let's say, tsunami that was Karlebach, lots of congregations are focusing more of what we could call congregational melodies, sing together, than just the plain nusach and the detached nusach. Actually, here's some interesting fact. In Argentina, in Latin America in general, we have some cultural differences with North America. And one of them is that in terms of cantorial art, Latin American cantors are more prone to improvising. They are not so much structured. So sometimes for in American congregations, they find interesting that maybe it's likely that a Latin American cantor can surprise you a bit more because he's not so much stuck to the nusach note by note, so to say. Because here, just for comparison, while in America, the first cantorial institutes were founded, I don't know, probably in the early decades of the 20th century. In Argentina, in Latin America, the first cantorial institute was created in 1992. So you have quite a difference there. Okay, now we will move to another idea in the Shulchan Aruch, which is very interesting, and we didn't get into this yet, which is the idea of kavanah, of intention. Because So far, we just went through what we would call, I don't know, objective, but quite specific items. But now the Shulchan Aruch will discuss a topic which is interesting, that is, what happens if you have a cantor with a beautiful voice, great pronunciation, and he starts to just taking a short prayer and takes a lot of time. He just repeats the words and start improvising with this really kind of strange coloratura ornaments the classic Hazzanim do. It's okay, it's not okay. So the Shulchan Aruch will deal with that. He says, a prayer leader, a Shaliach Tzibur, who lengthens the prayer so that people will hear his pleasant voice. Okay, here's the situation. But he will make a difference. If it was because of the joy in his heart that he gives thanks to God, may he be praised in pleasantness. A blessing shall come upon him. And this, as long as he prays with weighty intention, kavanah, and stands in dread and fear. But if he intends to make his voice heard and rejoice in his voice, behold, this is detestable. And in any case, anyone who lengthens his prayer is not acting properly because of the burdening the congregation. So we have two things. First, he says, okay, the ideal cantor wouldn't just lengthen the prayer. He wouldn't repeat the words. He would just write to the prayer. But in case he does, well, we have a difference here. If he does it because he's inspired, because he wants to please God, and this is very typical, for example, in the Hasidic congregations, and he starts repeating and improvising nigunim and stuff, but he does it because it's a way of expressing his emotional closeness to God. Okay, a blessing upon him. But if the only purpose to do this is because of vanity, it's because of, okay, I want you to hear me. Okay, this is like just Rabbi Yosef Karo says, detestable. This is not good. This is not right. And I would say he would better look for a good theater or opera house to do what he does, because he shouldn't be using the prayer to just pray himself. I would say it's almost idolatry. He's taking the bima to praise himself. So, but here, the interesting thing is that for the first time, we find the idea of kavanah, of intention. Someone mentioned it here before. It's not the same a virtuous cantor that uses his techniques, his voice, to please God and to show majesticness and dread and fear and all these very, very important emotions, for example, high holidays, that the cantor that uses his magnificent voice just to make a cult of himself. And the difference, it's not about the kind of voice or the length or the beauty, but in the kavanah, in the intention. And I would say both as a cantor, I started my music career as an organist, as an organist and as a congregant, that you can notice when a cantor is really considering himself only an instrument to connect the congregation with God. And you can tell when the cantor is just praising himself and trying to show everybody how amazing and how beautiful voice he has. So once again, this text has like, I don't know, 5 centuries, and it's also dealing with this. Now I want to move forward to more modern views. When I talk about modern, I talk about after medieval times, about some rabbis complaining about cantors. Relationship between rabbis and cantors are never easy. I always say that when I started to study to be a rabbi, I understood many points of view that rabbis had about cantors, because sometimes it's true that from a rabbinical point of view, looks that maybe the cantor isn't really in the place she should be. So we'll find a couple of these views. The first is from the Bach. The Bach is a very important commentator of the Shulchan Aruch, and he is discussing this question that came to him. This kind of rabbinical question, and he says, this came to us from the Shlichei Tzivur, who are not worthy, who are accepted in all communities because they sing in a nice voice, even though they are not well versed and they don't know the laws of prayer. And here is a very funny passage. And the hand of the wealthy are strong against the rabbis in this matter. Here's the problem. The board supports him. Here's the problem here. The machers really like him. So he says, okay, we have a problem here because until now, we just thought, I would say ingenuinely, that when we said support of the congregation was an homogeneous entity. And what we now find is that not always the congregation is just homogeneous. So what he's saying is, okay, they sing very nice, but they don't know anything about prayer. They don't know Dinei Tefillah, the laws of prayer. They are ignorant, but we have a problem here. The wealthy support them. So what we do? They want him, and it is actually quite a dilemma for synagogue boards. We know he is not a good cantor, but he gets us very important amounts of financial resources. What do we do? The rabbi is saying us, listen, I don't want to work with him. He's ignorant, he's not observant, he's not a good person, but I have donors that want him. So the most interesting thing is that this text is from the 17th century. These are no new stuff. We have been all involved in this discussion for centuries and centuries. Let's go to another. Rabbi Abraham Gumbiner is another important rabbi. He says, the early authorities already severely condemned cantors who stretch out the words and separate one letter from another and one word from another. This is a very interesting remark, because one of the things that rabbis usually classically criticize about cantors, about Shlichei Tzivur, is the overextension of words for the sake of, we call today coloraturas, or very virtuous passages, and actually dismembering the words, which is something that from an halachical point of view is absolutely wrong. And I want to move to the third comment. This is from the 18th century, and it's Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polonia. And he says that there are Hazanim who invalidate the prayers and stick to the art of singing. And just listen to this, which was originally secondary to the main prayer. And now they have abandoned the main thing and grabbed the secondary. What started as music, as an instrument to a deeper understanding of the text, became the opposite. They just focus first in singing and afterwards in actually understanding what they're singing. In our next session, that we will just get into one of beautiful texts by Abraham Yeshua Heschel. We will just get into that and the importance of a cantor understanding not only the plain meaning, what we can in Hebrew call the pshat, but also the deep meaning of the prayers. So we have these three rabbinical, let's say, critics to rabbis, to cantors. And what I want to move now is a very important, a very interesting article, so to say, because so far we have read about rabbis talking about cantors, but right now we will read about a cantor writing about cantors. There was a very important cantor called Pinchas Minkowski. I don't know if any one of you heard about him. Was very, very important in his time. Actually, was so important that in his funeral, the cantor that sang was Josele Rosenblatt. He was born in Ukraine, like lots of cantors. To sum up, he moved briefly to the US and he moved back to Ukraine again. He was very involved in all this intellectual movement in Odessa related to Bialik, in the Azamir Musical Society, which is a very important society there. He wrote compositions. He was like probably the most important cantor of the generation. And Pinchas Minkowski, besides being a composer and a cantor, was also a teacher, a scholar. And in the beginnings of the 19th century, actually the ending of the 18th century, he wrote several, the word in Hebrew is takanot, like enactments about what an ideal cantor should be. So I want to share with you some of them. He wrote 18, but some of them are just more organizational. So I just want to offer some of them to you. This is once again late 18th century, 19th century. It's quite modern. And it's interesting because for the first time in our session, we will read the views of a cantor about cantorial art. So he says, for example, the person who carries the responsibilities of leading the liturgical service is firstly a shaliach tzivur and afterwards an artist. So that's his first statement. First a shaliach tzivur, afterwards an artist, and not vice versa. Two, the cantors must begin to educate themselves in Jewish learning and music. We don't want and we don't need an illiterate cantor. This is very important because he acknowledges that in modern times, it's almost inadmissible, a cantor, a professional cantor, that doesn't have the basic Jewish and music literacy. A good voice is important, but it's not enough. 3, a cantor who decides to become a distinguished shaliach tzivur must know all the laws pertaining to the service, what we call today ilchot tefillah. He must know them. He must know how to pray, not just the music. 4, and this is very important, the cantor must realize that he isn't only a performer, but also a worshiper. How many cantors have you heard or just witnessed that when they are not singing, they are not praying? They're just thinking what they will sing, what they will sing next. And he says, no. When you are not singing in a loud voice, in Hebrew we call it bekol ram, you must be praying in loud voice. Because especially in the Ashkenazic ritual, you know that we usually sing in loud voice, probably the beginning and in the end of the prayer of the paragraph, and then we do what we call the davening, this very fast pace, not so loud reading, but you should read it. You can just sing in loud voice the first phrase, then just stay quiet and wait for the last verse, because you are also part of the congregation. And I will take it more metaphorically. You are not apart from the congregation, you're part of the congregation. 5, the cantor must always be the first and the last at prayer. Minkowski says it is inadmissible that the congregation should be waiting for the cantor to arrive, or the cantor leaves the synagogue before the rest of the congregants. Because also being the first to arrive and the last to leave is a trait of humility, of being humble. This kind of artistry idea of the cantor arriving at last time and everyone waiting for the cantor, it's not really right, says Minkowski. When you arrive to the synagogue, I would say the cantor and the rabbi should be there waiting for you, not you waiting for them. It's not the bride in a wedding, it's the cantor. 6, a distinguished cantor should not wave his hands or head, nor practice any theatrical mimicking during the service. I think, and I would say, it's very, very difficult for a Jew not to wave his hands when he's speaking or singing. But okay, I understand that here he's talking to do some kind of acting during the service, like trying to become all really dramatic, and he says it's not right. But once again, it's very difficult for us to just not wave or use our hands. 7, a cantor must not repeat any words or complete phrases. He, once again, shouldn't just do repetitions that are necessary. 8, observe the integrity of the music and preserve the soul of the music. He's saying that you just can't do whatever you want with the music. If you have a tune, you need to adjust yourself to that tune, because that's the tune the congregation knows. You can just try to adapt the tunes, especially the congregational melodies, to your own interests. Oh, sorry, I just skipped. This will be the 9. I don't know what is 10. Respect each other's position. He's talking here to cantors. Don't just predate other positions. Just go through clear processes. Don't just offer yourself for a lower fee, knowing there's another cantor in the position. What we will call today fair play. This will be number 10, and I will say 11. Songs from the theater and concerts and all profane modern songs must be kept out of the service. Nowadays, we can find this a bit like hard, but I think the idea here is that we should try to dig into our own music legacy, both classical and modern, before just run to grab the last pop hit and bring it to the synagogue. Just try to stick to your legacy. And the last one is very beautiful. Once again, he's writing here late 19th century, and he says, introduce, with the help of rabbis, special classes dealing with the service. Part of the role of the cantor is also educate the congregation. If you are, I think he's talking more the idea of a full-time cantor or regular cantor in a congregation. You should not only just focus on a beautiful prayer, but also have as your goal to educate the congregation to attain a higher knowledge of prayer and services. So I think this is very, very interesting, because it's acknowledging that being a cantor is not just about yourself, it's about how useful you are to the congregation. Because it's not really about you, it's about the congregation, it's about prayer. You're just the vehicle, you are an instrument, you are another actor in the play, but you are not just the star here. And I want to finish this session, and maybe we have a couple of minutes for questions or comments, with a very beautiful quote I found. First, before I finish, in Jewish tradition, we call it this Beshem Ombro. It's very important to name the author of things. All this, I just took it from a very, very interesting article about the topic by Rabbi David Golinkin, which is probably the most important posek halacha, the most important decision maker, rabbinical decision maker in the conservative movement in Israel. He's also an historian and researcher, and he has a very, very interesting article about the traits of the ideal Cantor. So I basically took all the sources from there. I think it's fair to mention it. This is from the Kosovo Rebbe, middle 19th century. He says, the Shaliach Tzivur is a pipeline. Through him pass the influence on Jews and the Jewish people. He must be filled with all sorts of the best spirituality, with Torah, prayer, good deeds, repentance, a broken heart, and by this he is always connected to he who received the prayers. And the Shaliach Tzivur needs to connect to the collective Jewish people reciprocally, and then he mediates between the Jewish people and our Father in heaven and binds them together. I think this is a very appropriate quote to finish at least this formal part of the session, because what he's mentioning here is the idea, I like the idea of pipeline. We're just a connector. And usually those who have studied about linguistics or literature know that connectors are worth because basically their function is to connect. They are not worth by themselves. There are some words that have value by themselves, and there's another words and or, for example, neither, that its value is in connect to other elements. So that's what the Cantor is, the Shaliach Tzivur. It's not valuable itself. Its value is about connecting the congregation with God. And I would personally add that nowadays, in which, as a Jewish people, we have very alarming numbers of assimilation, detachment from the congregation, I would say that also is a connector between Jews and Jews. Because we also, nowadays, we can't have an extra challenge, not just connect people with God or God with people, but connect people with people, to just make the newcomers or the ones that just come to synagogue for high holidays, just light the spark and just to try to ignite this inner fire that they have, but maybe they need to be, it needs to be stimulating. So, well, so far is the formal presentation. We have a couple minutes questions.